very good evening and welcome to Biz1st in Focus. Of course, this is the first time that we're meeting you in this new year, so I would like to wish all our viewers out there a very happy 2019. 2018, some things that we brought forward into the year 2019 was, of course, the economic issues that preceded and predated the constitutional crisis that hit our country. Of course, with that, a lot of political instability as well. But of course, the solution to all of this lies in the general public, of course, among the society. And for that, we've got in our studios today to discuss these issues and more, Professor of Sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. A very good evening and welcome to the show, Professor. Professor, starting off, now, like I said before, we've carried forward a lot of political issues, of course, into this new year. Along with that, we've carried a lot of economic issues as well. But speaking about the root of all of this, the political issues, how important do you think that political stability for our country is this new year?
Well, actually, it is not only for Sri Lanka, for any country desiring economic and social progress. It is absolutely necessary to have relative social and political stability. When I say relative, because you can never have absolute stability. Now, what we witnessed the last few months was an extreme situation, an unprecedented situation. In other words, we never had so much political uncertainty and stability in this country before. But as I already mentioned, it is always relative. In other words, we have had political instability in this country from time to time. There were times some of these situations reached crisis proportions. You know, we had mass uprisings, violence, war, and so on and so forth. So what I'm getting at is that in Sri Lanka, for decades, we have had political instability from time to time, on and off, and actually that situation that we have had in this country for decades has been a major factor impinging on economic and social progress in the country. In other words, we have not been able to really have consolidated economic and social progress in this country because of the political instability. So what we witnessed last year was, as I already mentioned, extreme, and we just can't afford to have that kind of instability.
We can't afford another episode of that.
Absolutely, and I think we should all look forward to having relative social and political stability, and that would very much depend on how capable we are in building consensus across various divisions that we have in society, in particular across the political divide. I think it is absolutely necessary that our political leaders realize that if they are really interested in the welfare of the people, the progress of the country and the future of our people, they certainly have to agree on one thing, and that is to have some degree of consensus, in spite of various differences they may have, so that they can let the country to really get on with the major tasks that are ahead of us, because we are facing huge challenges. I mean, you can look around and what the big challenges are, and as you already mentioned before we came here, that the rupee is basically depreciating steadily, and there is no let up, and certainly this is something that we should worry everyone, because it has very wide implications. Yeah.
So now, when speaking about political stability, of course we cannot forget our politicians, the politicians of the country. These are the people who spearhead the country. They are the people who are responsible for taking the country forward. Speaking about political stability, how hard do you see is it for us to establish political stability in the country in an environment where parliamentarians are seen crossing over parties on quite a daily basis during the final 52 odd days? of last year. We saw that happen on a daily basis. You see one of the MPs in this party on one day and moving to the other party on the other day, and then he just crosses back over. Are these crossing overs based on policy, personal agendas? What's your take?
Actually, this is really once again unprecedented, and I don't think that you see this kind of situation in many other countries in the world. I mean, I'm quite sure there are countries where there is this kind of very chronic pathological kind of political environment, but I think this is unprecedented. But I mean, like in this country, we have seen quite a different situation several decades ago. I mean, for instance, there were people breaking away from one particular party, joining, and sometimes forming a new party, and so on and so forth. But these were entirely, I would say, well, I wouldn't say entirely, but certainly it was on policy grounds. I mean, if you break away from a party, you will say that, well, we do not agree with the policies of our party, and therefore we want to move away and form a new party to pursue a new line of policy. But the point is that this kind of policy orientation of political parties has really degenerated to an extent where you do not really see much of a difference between political parties, particularly when it comes to certain policies. Like, for instance, I mean, in 1977 we had a major shift in economic policy, and of course that also had implications for social policy. But after 1977, we still maintain the differences across major political divisions like the two main parties. But the fact of the matter is that the distinction between these two parties in terms of policy orientation has become more confused, or rather blurred, if you like, so that you could really can see people in each of these parties basically having more or less similar ideas. For instance, we never reversed the major policy change that we witnessed in 1977. For instance, the open economic policy was never changed. And similarly, if you look at even other areas like social policy and so on and so forth, we don't see any new developments. Like, for instance, I mean, if you go back to 1958, when we enacted the Employees Provident Fund Act, that was really one of the major interventions on the part of the state to introduce social security for formal sector employees in this country, because we already had a pension for the few people
State
who were
sector.
in the but then and then also we introduced certain policies to support let's say, for instance, the landless peasants, like the tenancy legislation, what we call the Paddy Lands Act. Now you see, now those changes were made, and those are very significant policy changes. And similarly, of course, in the education sector, we have
free education
and so on and so forth. But the point is that we have really not made much progress on any of those things beyond 1977. In fact, there had been a stagnation of social policy making, let alone economic policy. So we really don't see much of a difference between these parties. Of course, they fight across the political divide. They
over various other issues.
They are very violent sometimes. They say that we are very different and so on and so forth. But we haven't really seen any evidence of that in actual policy making that we see. I mean, for instance, if you take poverty alleviation program was introduced in this country in the 1980s because poverty was quite widespread, and under President Premadasa we had the Janasavya program introduced, and that has been continued to to this day, of course, you know, they have changed the names all the time. You know, they made, now they call
when a new
it,
government
I don't know,
I
have lost track of what they call it now, but I remember it was called Samurti some time back, but probably they haven't.
I believe it's still called the Samurti program.
No, but I think, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to ask these people, you know, what they call it.
Of course, Professor, we are currently discussing the political instability in the country and how important it is to establish political stability, and how exactly are we supposed to do it in this new year that just dawned. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Biz First in Focus. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching Biz First in Focus. Of course, if you're joining us right now, we're in discussion with Professor of Sociology at the University of Colombo, Professor Siri Hettige. Professor, we were talking about political instability and how important it is to establish political stability in this new year that has just dawned. Speaking about political stability, I believe it's a very important component in political stability is trust, because everything that operates in the political sphere is based on trust. And speaking about the trust that the general public can have in their politicians with the events that unfolded during the end of last year, how far do you believe that the general public can trust the current members of Parliament?
Once again, we have a pathological situation in that regard in this country today. But I want to also add that trust is important not only in political, you know, relationships. Trust is also
social,
important,
economic,
and so on. I mean,
across the board.
Yeah, I mean, the entire banking sector, you know, depends so much on trust, and you know, a lot of the economic transactions, you know, across and within countries depend very much on trust. I mean, the point is, you know, you cannot have stable social relationships, economic relationships, political relationships, and so on and so forth, if you really don't have this very important element that's called trust. Now, I think, you know, people should be able to trust their representatives. I think when you can no longer trust, you know, your representatives, in other words, you know, when people come to you and ask you to support, I'm contesting and I'm going to represent you, and I'm going to, you know, basically represent your interest in the national parliament or maybe in any other, you know, representative body, and you take me, you know, into confidence and you vote for me. And you know, naturally, if people don't have any trust, they won't vote you into that position. But the point is that the moment you know, go out, having got elected, and you know, basically sort of you know, cross over to another party, you know, you basically undermine that trust that the people kept in you, right? So I think, you know, I mean, so that's why I said that it has reached a pathological, you know, state in this country. Trust, when trust is, you know, eroded, it is no longer possible to have stable relationships. You know, how do you really relate to people? You know, let's say, for instance, you invite me to come and participate in this discussion, and I have to have a great deal of trust in you for me to be able to, you know, come and sit with you and engage in this conversation. I trust you, and I take many things for granted, otherwise I wouldn't come. But the point is that, if, you know, that if I realize later on that, you know, my trust has been breached, for instance, you know, then, you know, we won't be able to really relate to each other anymore.
In this situation, the breach of trust in the political sphere was quite evident to me in the situation that unfolded with parliamentarian S.B. Dissanayake giving the conversation between parliamentarian S.B. Dissanayake and Palithurange Bandara, where they were offered, you know, ministerial portfolios and money in exchange for support inside Parliament.
You know, that's why I said that it is pathological, because it is really unprecedented. It is even unheard of. I mean, we know that, you know, like even in social life, you have, you know, certain things happening on the surface and there are certain undercurrents. I mean, that is natural. But the point is that in political life, I think it is absolutely necessary that we maintain a high degree of trust, because otherwise, you know, it is not possible for people to, you know, really participate in political life, because you see, you have to really take people into confidence. You know, you you have only one vote, and you are going to use that vote, to elect someone, thinking that this person is going to represent my interests, represent my kind of ideas, if you like. For instance, the policies that when we vote for a particular political party, we also vote not just for an individual, we also for certain policies.
The policies of the party.
But the point, so the point is that now when the policy orientation of a political party is destroyed, undermined by various forces, then it is basically a relationship between individuals. No, but the point is that a political party is a collective body that represents, a collective interest of a particular electorate, particular, support base. For instance, when people are asked to, vote for a particular political party, people are basically, expected to take the political party seriously. In other words, the ideas, the policies and interests that particular political party is going to pursue.
Do you believe that these parliamentarians are crossing over from one party to another based on policy decisions?
Absolutely not. I think this is really the biggest challenge that we are facing in this country. When the political parties can no longer be trusted, when the political parties can no longer be relied upon to pursue a certain line of public policy, it's a very difficult situation, and people certainly cannot go on, and the people will have to think about finding another way. I mean, the point, political parties have, degenerated in this country, and some political parties which are doing quite well, 50 years ago, are really in the background now. Of course, not necessarily because of this kind of, situation, but, parties become irrelevant over a period of time. Of course, new parties come up. Now, for instance, today in some countries we have green parties, parties that advocate, green policies because of the environmental crisis and so on and so forth. So the point is, it is really nothing new. But on the other hand, if you take, developed developed mature democracies, we still can see these policy distinctions between parties. Take, for instance, if you go to European countries, or to Australia or to United Kingdom, you can see parties distinguishing from each other in terms of certain policy orientations. Take for instance the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom.
You don't see Labour MPs crossing over to Conservative.
So I think we certainly cannot have a situation like what we have today, and I think we need to really look forward to having some kind of a reassessment of how we are going to really
deal with this problem.
Deal with this problem, and I have feeling that maybe even certain new political formations might come up, and those new political formations might over a period of time it might even take over. We never know. You see.
Of course, we would only know if these new political parties that supposedly would or would not come up, if they would take over at a general election. Of course, that is quite some time away. 2019 is quite an election-filled year. We will continue this discussion after this short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Biz1st in Focus. Welcome back. You're watching Biz1st in Focus. Of course, we were discussing about the political instability in the country and how important it is to stabilize this situation as far as the politics in the country go. Professor Siri Hettige, now we spoke about the individuals who are in power and how their actions have affected the country detrimentally as far as economics go, as far as social relations go. Let's talk a little bit about the institutional framework that exists in the country. How far is this affecting the economy and the general public in general?
Given the recent developments and given the situation that we find ourselves in this country today, our main focus should be on the institutional fabric, because it is the institutional fabric that we have in this country that can really underpin social and political stability in this country. Fortunately for us, we have hundreds of institutions operating at different levels, national, provincial and local, and also across different sectors, and dealing with a whole range of subjects, regulation, policy making, research, and so on and so forth. So I think we certainly have to concentrate more and more on our institutional fabric, because if we strengthen our institutional fabric, and if we really get our institutions to function effectively, productively, and so on, I think we would be able to really have a very strong institutional basis for us to maintain social and political stability, in spite of the fact that the politicians will probably behave in the way that they do for the foreseeable future. So I think our last resort is the institutional fabric. I have pointed this out many times. I mean, I don't see any responses coming from the powers that be. Unless and until we strengthen our institutions, I think our people are going to be adversely affected by political instability. Political stability can be there. I mean, we have seen in many countries political turmoil, but the countries are not really undergoing the kind of hardships that we are undergoing, mainly because the institutions are functioning. Now, you mentioned, we discussed the value of the currency going down and so on and so forth. But the point is that there are institutions in this country that can manage our economy. In other words, we have to have strong planning institutions. I mean, if we have a national planning outfit in this country, strong, independent, professional planning arrangement in this country, actually the economy can rely on that planning apparatus. And similarly, we have so many regulatory bodies, oversight bodies, and so on and so forth, and those institutions can also keep other institutions functioning. Like, for instance, we have law enforcement is so critical, and I think the law enforcement has to be supported by the institutions that are there in that particular sector and so on. Similarly, research institutions, I think the most important institution that you see in many fast developing countries is research institute.
One of the best examples being South Korea.
Absolutely. I mean, we in this country over the last 70 years have established research institutions in almost every field. So, it's not a question of not having research institutions. I'll give an example. We have a medical research institute, and medical research institute is very old. The point is that institution should be revamped, should be given the necessary resources so that it can really perform. I mean, I'll just give you another example at random. The Tea Research Institute, I mean, the tea is the only major export crop that we produce in this country, and therefore, I don't have to tell you how important it is to have a very vibrant, strong, well-resourced, Tea Research Institute in this country. Why can't we have it? Why can't we have it? We can have it. And similarly, I can give you any number of examples in the agricultural sector, industrial sector. We have a very old institute, ITI, Industrial Institute of Industrial Research. Why can't we put resources into that? So the point is that we are really not putting the emphasis where it matters. We do not divert the resources where it matters. We do not really recruit people and provide the necessary support to people to do vital things. I mean, if you don't do research, there's no question of keeping this economy in good order, because if you take the countries that are doing very well in the region, including our neighbor India, I mean, if India, India of course is compared to East Asia is not really as vibrant, but if you take a country like China, China is just trailing behind the United States. I mean, how long did China take to reach that level of development? I mean, just a few decades. I mean, I think they just.
So it's not a matter of us not being able to do it. It's us.
No, I think I mean.
Summering.
No, I think the problem is this. It is like having known what is wrong with you. Doctor would tell you this is what is wrong with you.
You don't cure it.
But there's no medicine here. I think that is our problem. That is the agony of Sri Lanka. We know what is our problem. We know what to do. But the point is that we just don't do it. And of course, you and I cannot do it because we are not the people who take those decisions. We are not the people who can really do what is needed. Like, for instance, giving priority to research. I mean, that should be a national priority, and everybody should agree. Across the political divide, they will say, we want to strengthen our research institutions. What is the problem? Now, that is what other.
There's no reason to disagree. Summing up.
No, that is why. I mean, similarly, we have a three-tier system of government. We have three-tier system of government. Why? Central government, provincial administration, and what is the division of labor? I mean, I see ministers going out into the countryside and constructing culverts.
That is not their job.
And paving minor roads, and putting up the board, with the photographs and so on and so forth. And actually, I'm ashamed to see, sometimes even the picture of the president is there. And actually, I'm living at Nugegoda, and in fact, they repaired, about 100.
So these boards are being put up. These boards are being put up by other politicians.
That's the point. Well, I don't know, but the point is that it
exactly,
is
Professor. Summing up the final comments that you made, it's pretty evident that the government has got their priorities mixed up.
Absolutely.
Of course. Professor, we could speak about these issues for days on end, but of course, I'm sorry to say that the time period allocated for this program has come to an end. But thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige, for coming on our show and giving us those very valuable comments. And from Biz1st in Focus, it's goodbye for now. Until next time, take care and God bless.